Bismillahirrahmanirrahim. Assalamu alaikum. Welcome to Fereeha Idrees Official. I am Fereeha Idrees. August 15 would be remembered as a momentous day, being the third Independence Day for Afghanistan in modern times, and for the closeness to Pakistan's Independence Day, which is 14th August. On this day, after a heroic war of independence, the Taliban forced a military defeat on the occupational forces in Afghanistan, transforming their status in media from evil villains to new Taliban. The UK's General Nick Carter, in the most recent interview, has pleaded to give time to Taliban. Let's watch.
And how do you feel about collaborating with the enemy when they have carried out such atrocities against UK military personnel over the years?
I think you have to be very careful using the word enemy. I think people need to understand who the Taliban actually are. And of course, what they are a disparate collection of tribespeople. As President Karzai put it to me only yesterday, they're country boys. And the plain fact is that they happen to live by a code of honour and a standard, which has been their standard for many, many years. It's called Pashtun Wali. It has honour at the heart of what they do. They are bound together by a common purpose, which is they don't like corrupt governance. They don't like governance that is self-serving. And they want an Afghanistan that is inclusive for all. So I think rather than talking
Except
about
women.
What?
Except women.
Well, again, I think we have to wait and see. I mean, I don't know what they mean.
We can't support the way that they treat women. We surely.
Well, I think you have to listen to what they're saying at the moment, and I think you have to listen to the facts on the ground.
They're saying they are definitely, they are definitely. Law.
Yeah, and I'm not saying that's anything that you and I would approve of particularly.
I'm just clarifying that.
Absolutely, but I do think that they have changed. I think they recognise that over the course of the last 20 years, Afghanistan has evolved. They recognise the fundamental role that women have played in that evolution. And yes, they, at the moment, will undoubtedly say that they want to respect women's rights under Islamic law, and that will be a Sharia law. But that doesn't necessarily mean that they won't allow them to be involved in government and in education and in medicine and those things that they need them to be involved in. So I think we have to be patient. We have to give them the space to show how they are going to step up to the plate. And whether or not we can work with them will very much depend upon how they treat all Afghans.
If one lesson that we have learned from Afghanistan, and if this is the lesson we have to take home, it is about one thing, that is patience. Taliban indeed had all the time on their side, and their patience has prevailed. But after 20 years, with the promise of becoming a new Taliban, the big question is, can they be trusted? Also, the question about their representation in the Western media. How is the media responding to their open and cordial press conferences and press appearances? Are they confused? Are they fair? And most importantly, are they accurate? Today, I will be talking to the famous Yvonne Ridley, author of the book In the Hands of Taliban. She's not only an author, she has been a journalist. She's an expert on regional issues, especially Afghanistan and Taliban in particular. She spoke about the misconceptions about the Taliban in an era when no one could dare talk about it. She was often demonized for her opinion. Here is Miss Yvonne Ridley. Thank you so much for joining us on this program. It has been 20 years since the old Taliban, and now they're being termed as new Taliban. Do you think Taliban have changed over 20 years?
I do think the Taliban has changed in 20 years. Certainly, they're quite different in their outlook to the Taliban of 2001 that I met. And, 2021, 20 years later, we've got the Taliban talking about women's rights. How wonderful is that?
Indeed, but even in back then, you always said that they treated you with respect, and maybe there were many misconceptions about them back then. What do you think now?
Well, they were demonized back then, beyond recognition. So much so that when they arrested me, I just thought, this is it. I'm not going to see the sunset tonight. This is a brutal, evil regime, and they hate women. And they have been demonized for, more than 20 years. And we've seen the results of that demonization in Kabul airport, the harrowing scenes, the people trying to get on board a moving plane, the people now blocking all the entrances and the roads leading up to the airport, desperate to get out because they're terrified of the Taliban. And I recognize that fear because I felt it when I was arrested by them. I just thought, they are going to kill me. And I see the same look and panic in the faces of the people queuing at the airport. And real or imagined, this is the result of 20 years or so of Western media demonization of the Taliban. And it's, of course, I went through my own harrowing experience and came out the other end and realized that all the fear was in my head, was in my imagination. And I'm not saying they're angels. I'm not an apologist or a poster girl for the Taliban. But I have to speak as I find. And every encounter I've had since with them has been productive. And if they hold good to the promises that they made at the extraordinary press conference in Kabul, then I think that the future could look bright for Afghanistan.
Indeed, you spoke about the demonization in the Western media. I remember very well how even you were demonized for trying to tell the truth. Are these all misconceptions, or is there a design that media doesn't want to see, maybe in certain stories, the two sides of the coin?
Well, the media have gone down this route that the Taliban are bad and evil, and it's very difficult to pull back now and say, oh, sorry, we made a mistake. What I find particularly frustrating is the perception that they're continuing today, that Afghan women have had a wonderful past 20 years under the American NATO occupation, and now all their freedoms and liberties are being snatched away by this evil, brutal regime. Well, what I would say to them is, you talk about women's rights. What about the 3,000 Afghans every year who try and take their own life? And these are only the ones that we know about. And 80% of those Afghans who try and commit suicide are women. And this is an extraordinary statistic because everywhere else in the world, the majority of people who try and take their own life are men. So what is it about Afghanistan that 80% of those who try and take their own life are women? And so I was looking at more of these statistics that have come from the Afghan Independent Human Rights Commission. And here's some other statistics to play with. The literacy programs have failed, and at least 60% of Afghans are illiterate. And in 2020, just last year, 10 million Afghan school children were thought to be out of school, and nearly 4 million have no access to getting an education. Now then, the West has had 20 years to do positive things in Afghanistan, and these statistics certainly do not support that. And these statistics were gathered by the Central Statistics Organization, which also revealed that 84% of Afghan women are illiterate. Now, we hear from Afghan women, MPs, businesswomen, and the Kabul elite. And, I'm very happy that they are liberated feminist women. It's wonderful, and I'm happy for them. But I come from a working class background, and I want to know what is happening to the working class women of Afghanistan, or some people would call it the peasant classes. They're the women I want to hear from, but they're the ones who don't have a voice, who aren't privileged to be able to speak English to the Western media, who are sitting and suffering in silence. So when I hear other women talking about women's rights, they're talking about a privileged elite. Only 2% of women in Afghanistan will get a further education at the moment. So, this isn't a great roaring success story that 20 years of occupation have delivered. It's not a success story by any means. But the Taliban have now taken over. And, let's make sure that they hold good on their promise to educate women and to educate them up to university standard. And let's hope that their record is better than the rancid, corrupt Ashraf Ghani government that has overseen this shocking state of affairs.
Yvonne Ridley, thank you so much for sharing.
Sorry, I had a rant there, but I really feel very
Thank you so much for
strongly about
the details. I will just add one more survey, which is a recent one as well, which says that a new survey conducted by the Central Statistics Organization reveals that 84% of Afghan women are illiterate, and only 2% of the women have access to higher education, as you have rightly said. But then there was huge amount of money being poured into Afghanistan, with $83 billion only for Afghan security forces, so much, millions of dollars for education. Where did that money go?
That's a very good question. It certainly didn't go creating jobs. American contractors and other outside contractors were brought in to build brand new schools that they couldn't fill with teachers, never mind pupils. All of the work that was done was purely cosmetic. The money, a lot of Western contractors made a lot of money out of Afghanistan. The Ashraf Ghani presided over the most corrupt government in the world. He said that he was going to crack down on corruption. Well, he didn't. He's denied leaving the country with sackfuls of money. I think he's turned up now in the United Arab Emirates. And of course, he's now still insisting on trying to undermine the Taliban. It's a very sad state of affairs. He is a disgrace, and he should go back to Afghanistan. He should never have abandoned his people. But what he should do is go straight to the police station, hand himself in, and be charged for either being incompetent or running a corrupt government, or both.
So when Taliban say that women will have rights defined by Sharia, we see a certain panic in certain circles as well. But how do you understand what are the rights defined by Sharia for women?
Well, there's a lot of misconception about Sharia law. And most of the people who are horrified by it don't know anything about Sharia other than people get their hands chopped off or people are stoned. The truth is that a lot of legal systems existing in the world today have adopted sections of the Sharia. It is the burden of proof is higher in Sharia than any other legal system in the world. The death penalty does exist as part of the Islamic criminal justice system, but its scope, however, is considerably more limited than the international community believes. However, certain countries, like Saudi, do, and the implementation of the death penalty do give the impression that it's the first option in sentencing. But if it's implemented correctly, that certainly isn't the first option. And I think that Sharia law creates stringent conditions for its use. So I really don't think that there is anything to fear if it is carried out correctly. Unfortunately, it has been hijacked in various countries across the world by men who have a long-distance relationship with their Islam. So if it's implemented correctly, I don't think there's much to fear. The French President Emmanuel Macron is saying that these restrictions on women's dress and women's freedoms and liberties in Afghanistan under the Taliban, he's been very critical. And this from a man who has ripped the hijab of schoolgirls and has made it illegal by law for women wearing the niqab. And it seems that it's okay for the French to dictate what Muslim women should wear, but it isn't for the Taliban. So there's lots of hypocrisy out there, lots of fear, as I say, some of it's real, some of it's imagined. And I think that we have to sit back and watch and hope, that we're going to be pleasantly surprised this time around. And I think stability in Afghanistan, which is what they keep emphasizing. They keep saying, we want peace. And I think that if they can roll that out, then it will be advantageous to Pakistan. My understanding is that Pakistan was bracing itself for another huge wave of refugees from Afghanistan. But the deluge hasn't happened yet. So that in itself is an indication that while there are some people who are fearful, there are a lot more who are prepared to wait and see.
Yvonne, you were one of the very few people who were always against the war in Afghanistan. Our Prime Minister Imran Khan was also one of those voices when there were very few voices. Now that it seems like everybody is on board on this idea, do you think the world has learned any lessons about wars?
No. I think that a lot of people got very rich on the back of the war in Afghanistan. And that is criminal in itself. I do think America has had a shock. It's spent 20 years, $2 trillion and billions more in aid, getting rid of the Taliban, only to now be working alongside the Taliban to evacuate US citizens. The irony is immense. And I think that it will have shattered the confidence of the Americans. They've just handed over one of the most highly equipped armies to the Taliban. I'm told that the Taliban now have more Black Hawk helicopters than many other armies in the region. They've suddenly inherited an air force, a military. And the interesting thing is that the Taliban, when they arrived in Kabul, they didn't sack anybody. Now, when the Americans arrived in Iraq, they sacked an entire army. Of course, that was a big mistake. And they sacked the civil service, which was another big mistake. The Taliban have told legislators, civil servants, everybody please come to work as normal. And as I say, they've obviously thought a lot about this. Well, they've had 20 years to think, to reflect on their first mistakes and to get into a position where I think that they are ready to govern. And they're talking about having women in the government as well. I think, you know, we're in for an interesting time. We have to be patient. This is a fledgling government. It has inherited a system that has been run by corrupt politicians. It is not going to be an easy transition, but I think we need to give them support.
So who do you think has won this war?
Oh, well, the Taliban. Militarily, you know, it's been a staggering victory. They went through Afghanistan like a hot knife through butter. They couldn't have done it without popular support on the ground. I'm not saying all Afghans are happy. There are pockets of protests right now, but let's put it into context. It's not huge. It's not a divided nation. There are pockets of people who didn't want to see the Taliban come to power for a lot of different reasons. What I'll also say about the Taliban, which is something that is much loved by the working classes, is the Taliban hates corruption. It hates corrupt officials, and it hates people making money off the back of the poor. So I think that, you know, now is the time where the poor and the dispossessed might just start to get a voice and have a say in how they see a future Afghanistan.
So when do you plan to visit Pakistan and Afghanistan?
I'm waiting for the invite. You know, I'm a big fan of Imran Khan. He has always been unwavering in his vision for Pakistan, and he has always been very strident and critical of US foreign policy. It's not that he's anti-American, but he has been critical of US foreign policy. He's seen how corrosive and toxic it has been. And I think that as for America, it's going to take them 10, 15 years to recover from this.
Indeed. Yvonne Ridley, thank you so much for joining us on our special YouTube program. We will be talking about this in the days to come. Thank you for watching our video. Do give me your comments. Take care of yourselves.